Okay, looks like we're ready to start. Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to Developing Your Social Capital as a Military Veteran, sponsored by Deutsche Bank. If you've already checked in via Twitter, welcome aboard. If you haven't, head over to twitter.com/recruitmilitary and let us know you're here. Our handle is @RecruitMilitary. First, we want to thank our sponsor, Deutsche Bank, for bringing this webinar to you. You can connect with them directly on their website at www.db.com/careers. My name is Liz Wheeler. I'm the social media manager here at Recruit Military. Joining me today as a guest host is Bill McGowan, founder and CEO of Clarity Media Group. Bill has been a media coach for almost 15 years, advising clients such as Eli Manning, Sheryl Sandberg, Jack Welch, and Mary J. Blige, to name a few. Bill has also coached hundreds of clients for various high-stakes events, such as TED Talks, university commencement addresses, 60 Minutes interviews, and Today Show appearances. He's coached executives from Facebook, Dropbox, Spotify, Google, the New York Times, Harley-Davidson, and many more on public speaking, and has published a book detailing these techniques called Pitch Perfect, How to Say It Right the First Time, Every Time. Today, Bill's going to talk about effective communication as it relates to your job search, from networking opportunities to career fairs to job interviews and at the workplace itself. Bill, we're delighted to have you host this webinar. Welcome aboard.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate the invite, and a warm welcome to everybody who's joining us on this webinar. I'd love to start off by just offering my sincere thanks to everyone who's joined us for your service to our country. We civilians are enormously grateful for your sacrifice, your commitment to the pursuit of freedom all over the world. So thank you from all of us. I'd love today to give you some guidance and some tips on how to set you up to succeed in transitioning to a prosperous and rewarding career in the wake of your military service. And a lot of what I'll be talking about today, I've included in this book that I've just published in April. And after this call, I would love it if anyone wanted to follow me or contact me for additional questions. I would welcome that. Oftentimes on this Twitter handle, I post advice on a daily and multi times a week basis. So I would love to connect with you there. Essentially what I'm looking to do today is help you be more successful networking, give you some strategies around how to ace that interview and impress people who are looking for promising job candidates, and also just how to keep going in building these connections so that you don't just get the next job, but you set yourself up for advancement and additional opportunities after you've gotten that job. Ultimately, what you're looking to do when you communicate in any situation, whether it's a networking event or a job interview, you want to seem professional. You want to seem like the type of person that this organization is going to be proud to say you belong to. You want to say things in a job interview or in networking that doesn't sound like everybody else, that stands out and is slightly memorable. And you also want to be able to persuade people that you are a good fit for their organization, that you have the qualities that will ultimately help this organization succeed and make them glad that they hired you in the first place. The biggest advice we give people when they are communicating to advance their career is to not overlook how important storytelling is. And perhaps you've heard this from other sources, but it's so much better to go into a job interview not just saying I'm resourceful or I'm a creative problem solver. It's very important ahead of time to think of real situations, real stories in which you demonstrated those qualities, because when you embed facts inside of a story, it's much more likely to stick and resonate with the person you're talking to. And if you can paint a picture of a story and help the listener imagine the scenario, it is ultimately much more memorable. So what we're constantly trying to do with clients is adhere to a principle that I talk about in this book. It's called the Scorsese principle. And essentially what I'm suggesting is that you think of yourself like a film director. And film directors, what they are doing is they are constantly acknowledging that we are imaginative creatures, that in our brains we have a movie reel constantly spinning. And you, as the communicator, it's very important for you to dictate what visual images are spooling through the mind of your listener, to be a visual storyteller, and for you to control what imagery the listener has in their head. If you wind up speaking too abstractly, too theoretically, what you do is you don't provide your listener with images to work with. And what happens with the human brain is if they don't have images to work with, we go off and make our own images. And that's when your listener starts to daydream and get distracted. So if you want to engage your listener, focus on telling stories that have visual detail to them. So if you have the opportunity to select between two different types of communication, I strongly recommend that you adhere to what's on the right side of your screen and try to keep the content that is more in the category of the left side of the screen to a minimum. This will help you stand out. It'll help distinguish you among all the other candidates for positions. So where do you get these stories? Well, you have to start collecting them. And if you don't have one of these leather-bound books, I would suggest you get one. And in it, I want you to think back to your service days or maybe even a prior job and think back to the situations where you distinguished yourself, where you went above and beyond and accomplished a goal that may not have been considered easy when you set out to start tackling it. And write these stories down in this book and realize that it's these stories that are going to wind up being the important content when you try to persuade people that you would be a valuable asset to their organization. Now, one thing I want to make sure all of you never do when you are going into what I call a high-stakes communication situation is start winging it or ad-libbing, thinking that you'll just be quick on your feet and good in the moment. This is where a lot of people fall short and underperform. We all have a tendency to think that there are people born with this good communication gene, that they're just quick off the cuff and great on their feet, and that's really not true. The people who are excellent communicators are the ones that think about what they're going to say in advance, rehearse it, and they know it. They don't leave it to chance, and you shouldn't either. So how do you organize your thoughts? Well, this is a tool that we share with our clients, and they find that it's very valuable in helping them organize their thoughts. Think to yourself, there are a number of different components to anything that I'm going to say to somebody, whether it's a job interview answer or even just chatting somebody up at a networking event. There's some basic point that you want to make, but hopefully you'll use one of these other rows to illustrate your point. That could be the story we've been talking about. It could be an example you give. Or maybe there's an interesting statistic that illustrates your value as well. Maybe you increase the efficiency or productivity of your unit by 3x or 4x over a 4-week period. Whatever that stat may be, you don't want to make your conversation statistically heavy, but sometimes this is an excellent tool to illustrate your effectiveness. And then what I want you to think about is that these columns that you see on the top, they represent the types of conversational topics that come up in a job interview or a networking event. people want you to discuss what your value is. They want you to be able to expound on what your previous job experience was, or what skills have you acquired during your service to the country. What are you eventually looking to do? What ideally would be your optimum pursuit? How are you a good fit for this company that you are now a candidate for a job for? And also could be a question about, so tell me about what your service time was like. You want to make sure that you have the right kind of stories to tell. And this is ideally a grid that you're not going to put full scripted verbatim answers into. The idea is you just want to put bullet point reminders to yourself about where you're going to take the conversation when it turns in any one of these topical directions. Ideally, in each column, you really shouldn't have more than 12 or 15 words, just enough to remind you and prompt you. And again, you're not going to have content for every single row. You will always have some point that you're trying to make, but then ideally you'll probably have one of the next three, a story, an example, or a statistic. So moving to the next slide, it's important not to think of a job interview as a strict Q&A. I don't want you to think of it like a legal deposition or any other kind of formal structured Q&A. What's important to keep in mind is that, again, you are looking for what topic is this interviewer driving me to discuss. It's a similar dynamic to a party where you're sitting around the dinner table and suddenly the conversation starts turning in a lot of different directions. What are your Labor Day plans? The beginning of the NFL season. The player from USC who's been suspended. Air surveillance over Syria. An upcoming election. And think to yourself, all right, well, there are basically conversational topics I need to be prepared for. And it means it's not always about having to just do your best answering the very specific nature of the question and then offering nothing more. That can tend to lead to a very flat job interview. Your definition of success should not be just staying out of trouble or fending off the questions that come from the interviewer. I think you should look at the questions as something that prompts you into interesting and engaging storytelling. But if they ask you about what your goals are for the future, that is the conversational topic you need to honor. You can't suddenly start jumping the tracks and talking about something else, because then the interviewer will feel as though you've hijacked the interview on them. And be very conscious of what may not sound like the first official question of the interview. They can be very tricky. So, what's up? How are you? What have you been up to? How are things? You should never think of those as just casual conversation starters. The reason that they can be tricky is they're almost too easy and too obvious. They're designed by a job interviewer to get you to just start talking without maybe a prepared game plan. And for many job interviewers, this is a real indicator of your most authentic self. So you want to have a very specific idea of what you're going to do when those conversation starters are thrown your way. And then there are lots of other questions that typically come up in a job interview. Tell me about yourself shouldn't prompt a verbal resume that you now, because they've got your resume in front of them. They really want to know what things are meaningful to you, what drives you, what inspires you getting up out of bed in the morning. That's really what they're driving to. What have you been doing since you've left the service? Why are you better than the last 6 people who have been in the door? you should be able to talk about what makes your qualifications distinctive. And again, this kind of question is best replied to with some kind of story that you tell. In fact, a lot of good job interviewers will ask questions to make you tell them stories. And then here's the trapdoor question a lot of times. Give me an idea of something that went wrong, where you just plain got it wrong. And I think that it's good to be honest about something that didn't work out. I think job interviewers are impressed with your frankness and ability to highlight that, but it's very important to immediately pivot to how you used it as a learning experience, what it taught you, and how it helped the mistake actually helped you perform better on the next similar task that came your way. Mistakes are fine, just make sure you always illustrate to them how it was a learning experience. And they also want to know, well, how quickly can you make an impact here? And you just want to stress probably that one of the cornerstones of being in the military is adapting to changing situations quickly and thoroughly. And I think many of you on this call have the kind of leadership and teamwork skills and problem-solving skills that a lot of employers are looking for. They may ask you, well, you've never had a job in the telecommunications field or whatever industry you're looking to break into. How are you going to overcome that? And I think it's important to know maybe not what is entailed in being in that particular industry, but what are the skills that would set you up to succeed, and again, drive back to situations during your service that illustrate how you have those skills already. Don't prepare for a job interview backwards. And what I mean by that is the trap can be to try to sit down and predict every possible granular question you could be asked, and then developing answers to those specific questions. What I'd like you to do is think about flipping it, and now say to yourself, all right, what are my greatest hits? What are the best points I can make? What are my most compelling stories, the examples that they will be able to relate to, and maybe any real eye-opening stats that illustrate my value and my worth. Let me figure out what those are, and now let me look at the questions that come up as just openings and opportunities to get to these things. It's actually more vital for you to think and start with what your answers are and what your content is, then in a very defensive posture, think about the questions and then just try to come up with content to satisfy the question that's been asked. How you appear is also very important in any of these situations. Eye contact, super important. The fact of the matter is we all break eye contact with people we're talking with in order to get mental privacy to think through what we want to say. And if you can have more sustained, meaningful eye contact, I think it makes a better impression. So if you find you're the type that breaks eye contact because you feel the invasiveness of the stare from the other person is a little too unsettling, you could look at their earlobe or the stem of their glasses, or something that keeps your focus in the general area of their face, but gives you something very small and private to zone in on and give you the privacy to think without breaking your eye contact. Try to sit forward in an interview chair, physically engaged. If your back is all the way against the back of the chair, you're probably sitting back too far. Sometimes job interviewers can be very long-winded and their questions can go on a long time. I find that excessive nodding almost conveys a feeling like you're acting as though you're intently listening. And if the question gets very long, you can look a little bobbleheady and impatient. So see if you can show an engaged, curious look on your facial expression, but try to keep the nodding to a minimum. And also, a flat, neutral listening expression sometimes doesn't look like you're happy to be there. Doesn't mean that you have to have a frozen, toothy grin on your face, but it does mean try to have an engaged, interested look on your face when you're in that kind of situation. In the book, I call the need to be brief and to the point the pasta sauce principle. And I call it that because for any of you who cook and put a pot of sauce on the stove, you know that if you boil that down and reduce the volume, it's going to have more flavor and be more dynamic. The same holds true for how we speak. If you can whittle down what it is you want to say to its essence and its core, it's going to be more memorable to the person listening. And here's how you should think of it. Think of your thought or your answer as having a beginning, a middle, and an end. Most people are actually pretty good about getting out of the starting blocks and driving to the crux of the point they're trying to make. But then something that afflicts so many of us is that we become a lot less strategic in wrapping up the thought and getting to the finish line. And sometimes we find ourselves just droning on and on without really a game plan in mind. And this is where bad things can happen. This is where we're more in an ad-lib kind of situation. And again, going against that rule of being spontaneous. So what I'd like you to do instead is from being prepared enough and knowing your content so that from the moment you open your mouth to start talking, you have a general idea what the full arc of that thought sounds like. From, what does the finish line of this look like and sound like? Not in terms of a memorized verbatim answer, but again, what's my point here and how am I going to bring it to life through some illustration, story, example, or data? You should know what those two components are. And if you cannot have a general idea what the full arc of your answer is, by the time you start talking, that's an indication that you're talking too long. It's not about not going beyond 30 seconds or 40 seconds with an answer. It's not about a time limit. It's about how much control do I have over knowing where I'm going to end up with this thought. And the problem is being brief is hard work. This is a great quote. I love it because it's so true. It's also very similar to a famous quote from Mark Twain, who said, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one. And boiling down your message and your stories and making sure they're tight and engaging and efficient requires upfront work, but it's time incredibly well spent and valuable. The other thing that can creep into the way we speak and compromise our whole executive presence are filler words, and we all suffer from some version of them. I don't know how many people on the call do, but these are the ones that we come across most often. Sort of and kind of are big ones right now, and I find that they really strip the conviction out of what you're saying. A lot of people come to us looking for help on how to get over this habit, and what I tell them is, I want you to think of your brain and your mouth as two cars on the road. So just indulge me with this illustration, this metaphor. Your brain is always the lead car, and it's always out in front of your mouth, and it's navigating what conversational road you want to take the conversation down and what words you're going to be using to articulate this next thought. And your mouth receives the instructions from your brain and executes it and actually verbally conveys it. And we'd like to think that our brain efficiently makes these decisions about what it is we're going to say next, but we often know that's not the case. Sometimes we need to ponder exactly what it is we're going to say or the selection of the words we're going to use. And if we're speaking briskly, if the pace pace of our voice is quick, it can be almost as if our mouth is tailgating our brain, like it is in this picture. And that's usually where filler language comes in. Filler language is what your mouth does while it's waiting for your brain to make the next decision about what to say. So in order to get this habit, in order to get over this habit, what I'd like you to do is think about disrupting the pace with which you speak. It's almost like you're building a safer car length distance between your mouth and your brain. That's going to mean speaking a little bit slower, and it's going to mean just coming to a pause if you're not exactly sure what the next thing is. Many people are really hesitant about having a beat or two of silence. They feel as though maybe the conversation has died down. I would argue the exact opposite. To me, the most confident people in the room are the ones that allow you to see them thoughtfully selecting what they're going to say next. To me, the most anxious and nervous people feel compelled to have a steady streak of sound coming out of their mouth, even if it's just filler and not content. So here's the rule of thumb. The less certain you are about the next idea or word coming out of your mouth, the slower you should be talking. That slower pace and those pauses are going to give your mind the freedom and the time to find not just the first thing that pops into your head, but the best thing that comes to mind. And that is really an important rule to live by when it comes to communication. So what I'd like you to do is think about disrupting your speaking pace. Not only is it important to eliminate filler, but it's more engaging for the ear of your listener to have both a combination of brisk and slow. You also want to have a certain amount of emotion in your voice. That helps indicate that you have a passionate interest in what it is that you're suggesting you're going to bring to this organization. And also, sometimes when you're making a key thought, it's not about hitting it louder and harder all the time. Sometimes pulling back and lowering your voice, but keeping up that emphatic nature to the delivery can be a very effective tool. So again, try to avoid all your words coming out with the same pace, whether that is uniformly brisk or uniformly slow. You want a combination of the two. And the rule of thumb is when you are conveying something that you want to have be more memorable, more sticky in the mind of your listener, downshift, slow down, take it more deliberately. It's going to send a subliminal idea to in the mind of your listener that this is more important than everything else I've told you because I'm slowing down and I'm taking my time to tell it to you. Okay? And you can obviously, over the information that you don't feel is as vital, you can step on the gas and be nice and brisk and conversational, as long as you are well aware of how you are navigating your way through this answer. Most people are tricked into thinking that a thoughtful pause is this incredible expanse of time, and it creates an awkwardness with your listener. And what's so interesting, whether you get up in front of a room of people or you're speaking one-on-one to a job interviewer, the perception of a pause in your mind is completely different than how it's being perceived by your listener. And again, a thoughtful beat or two of silence is totally acceptable. In fact, I would argue that if a job interviewer asks you a question and you want to give it another couple of beats of thought before you decide what direction to take it in, that will impress the interviewer, that you're taking the care and the time to be thoughtful about what you say. So most people have a completely different way of perceiving the whole notion of pausing. And now the words we use are very important. I find that all the great minds in history have subscribed to this notion that simpler is better. We live in a time where there's a tremendous amount of jargon and words that have been made up. I hear them all the time, people talking about being choiceful in their decisions, and it's really not necessary to make Webster's dictionary any thicker than it is. In fact, here's a good rule of thumb. If you're writing something on your tablet or your computer and you write a word and you see a red line underneath that word, that means that's not a real word. That means it's not recognized as a part of the English language. So you should not be using that word in conversation. My wife heard one this week. She's a journalism professor, and she attended a faculty meeting, and somebody was talking about agenda-sizing the meeting. And she texted me in the middle of the meeting saying, honey, I've got a new jargon word for you, agenda-size. And there's absolutely no reason to be making up words like this. Shorter, simpler ideas, shorter, plainer language. I think it's more impressive. I've had clients say, I'm worried that if I don't throw around fancy words and a lot of jargon, that I'm not going to sound like I know what I'm talking about. And my argument is exactly the opposite. It's the people who have a flimsier grasp on the content who feel the need to use jargon or acronyms as a crutch. And this is really important because I know acronyms are super prevalent in the military. There's a good reason for them. It's because it's a verbal shortcut among your colleagues in the service. It's a more efficient way of communicating. But realize you're now out in the civilian world where some of these acronyms are going to be completely foreign to people. So be careful not to assume that they have the same level of knowledge that you do. Before you go into any high-stakes communication situation, I want you to warm up. Athletes do it. Performers do it. A pitcher in baseball would never just get off the bench and go to the mound and start throwing in a game. And you shouldn't do this either. If you've got a phone call that's important, that is a prior step to an actual job interview, you should sit down for 15 minutes, get your head in the ball game, figure out what it is you're trying to accomplish on this call, jot down some thoughts if you haven't filled out your grid already. Never schedule something right up until an important meeting or important conversation. You never want to be running from one thing to the other feeling mentally scattered. And warming up out loud is important. There's a huge difference between saying audibly some of your answers and stories to the things you know are going to come up in an interview. Saying them out loud and hearing yourself is a much better exercise than silently imagining in your mind what it is you're going to say. And years ago, they used to say, well, just practice in the mirror. You don't need to do that anymore. The greatest communication rehearsal tool on the planet has been created. And whether you have a tablet or a phone or both, what you should do is roll the video function on your phone, get a sense of how you sound, what you look like, get a friend to sit across the desk from you, and have them just pepper you with some interview questions, and rehearse, and watch the video back, and be your own most brutal critic. For those of you who feel nerves, and this is a very common affliction, what I'd like you to think about is the more prepared you are, the less anxiety you're going to feel. That is an absolute true equation. You're probably going to be the most nervous in the first 2 minutes of any interview. So practice that conversation starter and practice that question of, so what's your impression of our company? Or so what do you know about us? It's also important, I didn't touch on it earlier, research not only the company you're interviewing with, but the person who's going to be interviewing you. Don't make it seem like you've stalked them on social media and know what the name of their dog is. You know, you don't want to take it that far, but you want to know what their experience is, where they grew up. Maybe there's a common thread there that you can use to break the ice. Again, warm up, and if you suffer from that little tremble or shake in your voice, that typically means that you are not breathing properly. You're taking short, shallow breaths from your anxiety. Good, deep inhale through your nose, holding it. Long, slow, steady exhale through your mouth will slow your pulse. It will replenish your lungs with the air that you need to project with a steady voice. This is a great way to get rid of that nervous sound in your voice if it's something you suffer from. And when we're a little bit nervous, we tend to talk much faster. In that first 2 minutes of any important conversation, take it at a nice, deliberate pace. So here are some things to definitely stay away from. Don't sound like your entire life depends on getting this position. In fact, the fundamental shift in your mind is you're never asking somebody for a job. You are offering to them the skills and the experience you have that can make their organization better. Making that fundamental shift in your mind is very important. If they start asking you something that is not in your skill set, I think it's better to be honest and say, you know, that's not something that was part of my experience, but this was. I find a lot of people try to fake it through an area of weakness in a job interview. That never impresses anybody. Don't ever complain. There was a great Henry Ford quote from years and years and years ago. Don't complain and don't explain. And I'm sure there's some similar motto in the military, but you're never going to say anything negative about a commanding officer or a prior boss, because that interviewer will think it's just a matter of time before you'll say something negative about them. Leave your phone out of the room. Turn it off. I know this sounds self-evident, but we have an HR expert on our staff who used to do job interviews, and she said that people would be texting in the middle of a job interview. Hard to believe, but it's true. And make sure you know what the culture of this company is like. If it's a very casual tech company, don't wear a suit and tie. If it's a more corporate setting, don't wear a sports shirt. If you tool around their website, you can get a sense for how people dress. Now, after the job interview, it's important to stay connected. Make sure that you either email or, better yet, send a personal note through the mail. These are in short supply, so they stand out more. And thank them for their time. You want to get connected with them on social media. You want to stay abreast of what's going on in that industry. It'll give you a good excuse to drop them a note and maybe share some thoughts you have about a development that happened in this company's industry. You're constantly trying to prove your worth. Stay in touch when there are opportunities to do so. And ultimately, this is one of my all-time favorite quotes. You want to keep it simple. I said it earlier. If you keep things very basic and very simple, you'll sound a lot more knowledgeable. I was also talking the other day with someone who was asking me, what's the best way to follow up with someone after you've had a job interview and that week or two has gone by and you haven't heard from them? And the instinct is to send them an email and say, dear so-and-so, just following up, curious if, you've made your decision. It's really just asking for an update. I don't find that that is a great way to go about it. I think all the other people who have interviewed for this position are probably doing just that. So what if you were to send them an email or a note and say, thanks for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation the other day. And, I've been thinking a lot about what you mentioned were the priorities of the company moving forward. And, I had an additional thought about something that could be an effective strategy. what would you think if we were to do X, Y, and Z? I think that it would be a much more effective follow-up to execute. It would show the interviewer that you already feel invested in this company's success, that you're thinking about it constantly, and you are trying to provide value before you're even officially a member of the company. Also, just even using the word we instead of you helps them already envision you as a part of their organization. I find that terminology, what would you think if we were to do this, is a much more effective way to go. So to recap some of the more important things: preparation, know your storytelling, practice your storytelling out loud, go into any situation firmly convinced that you have the character and the skills that you've proven time and again that you know are valuable to this organization. Convey that through storytelling. Realize that you are not asking for a job. You do not have your hat in your hand. You are offering them something that is truly valuable and aligns very nicely with the goals that this company is trying to accomplish moving forward. I think that those are really the important things to think about. You want to project yourself as a positive thinker, somebody who they can imagine wanting to see on a daily basis for months and years to come. So I wish you the best of luck in your search moving forward. And again, I welcome you to stay in touch with me. This is a great email address at the bottom of the screen if you have follow-up questions. And I'd love to also follow your progress on Twitter or Facebook, and so feel free to connect with me there. Liz, thank you very, very much.
Bill, we appreciate all the great information. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, you can find Bill's book, Pitch Perfect, at bepitchperfect.com. You'll also be able to listen to this webinar again on Recruit Military's YouTube channel. We will be uploading it just as soon as we can in the next day or two. If you have any questions or comments about the material or any of the topics covered, please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach me, Liz Wheeler, at lwheeler@recruitmilitary.com, and you can reach Bill McGowan at bill@bepitchperfect.com. Please be sure to visit Recruit Military and check out our job-seeking resources. They're 100% free to military veterans at recruitmilitary.com, and visit the sponsor of this webinar, Deutsche Bank, at www.db.com/careers. That's going to wrap up everything for today. You can close out of the GoToWebinar program by clicking on the X on the toolbar, and I hope everyone has a good day. Thank you.